Welcome again, everybody. Allison Fine Arts, New York. My name is Dan Chen. I'm the director here, and we have a treat today because we are having a conversation about Chinyee, the solo exhibition for artist Chinyee today, and we have her son, Andy, here. And Jeffrey Wexler, who was the senior curator at Zimmerli Art Museum, that's at Rutgers University for many years, and continues to curate. There's actually a great project at Hollis Taggart, a gallery in Chelsea that Jeffrey curated that Chinyee's also a part of right now. So she's having a little moment in New York right now. I'll say a few words and then I'll get right into the questions. But Chinyee was born in 1929 in Nanjing. She got a scholarship to study here in the US. She came over when she was just 17. Just showed up. Where did she come into?
She took a boat from Shanghai to San Francisco, and then she hopped a train from San Francisco to Grand Central, and amazingly someone picked her up and got herself.
Yes, obviously no cell phones or anything. And then she just stayed. So she spent most of her career, most of her life up in Dobbs Ferry painting. She became well established, and in 1997, which is why we have Jeffrey here, he discovered her work while he was researching this exhibition. I have her catalog here, which was shown at the Zimmerli. And this is, I'll let you talk about it a little bit in a minute, but it showcased a lot of Asian American abstract artists, and Chinyee was one of them. So Alice King, the founder of the gallery, discovered Chinyee through this show, and later on met her, and then we started showing her work. So this was in the early 2000s, and we've been showing her in Hong Kong ever since. This is our 5th exhibition for her, and the first, of course, in New York, because we're brand new here. So, we're very excited to have you both. Thank you for joining us. Why don't I just start with you, Andy, and you can continue perhaps the story, if you want, or just tell us about your mom and her personality, and then we'll get to her art too.
Well, thanks Dan and Daphne for hosting this wonderful show. Martine's already hitting me. As we walk through the gallery, it is kind of semi-chronological. But I always thought, it's an interesting story to get her here. I guess a lot of Americans have a lot of immigrant stories. As I said, she was always a very popular student. As I've learned back in China, she was at Nankai middle school and high school, and she was referred as a top student, and that's how she got her scholarship to the College of St. Vincent in the Bronx. So that trip, I always find it remarkable to get from China to Queens without any phones or anything like that. Somehow she made it there. And she used to tell me, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. She always was very artistic. I think it's one of the reasons her parents were able to let her go. Back then, the son wanted to keep home, so it was the experiment was to send her off to the U.S. So she made it, and fine arts major at Mount St. Vincent, then NYU, and was very active in the art students league on 8th Street, and she painted. And that's what she did. If I reflect back on her, you are what you do, she painted. And that has been a constant from the moment that she came to the US, literally right up to the very, very end. She supported herself by working any way that she could. She was at the United Nations, I think that's chronicled.
Yes.
She started off as a tour guide because she was always very bubbly and very energetic. Then, I think through her charm, someone in the accounting department offered her a role, and that was a terrible idea. She did not do well there. And then she finally made her way, with the help of my father, into interpretation. And I think the benefit of working in the UN, as I reflect, is that you're able to travel. She was a simultaneous interpreter between English and Chinese. And one of the big benefits was able to go back to China every 2 years. And she did. So she went back every 2 years. And she was also sent on various missions, is the word that was used when I was growing up. And that brought her to South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and I went back to China, and all of these experiences, I think, were inputs into her work. And you can see the influences. She was always very curious. She always had her sketch pad, as long as I can remember. And that's what kind of brought peace to her. She was in her element. And it was never a chore. It was what she wanted to do. And it was just, how can I accelerate my UN time so I can retire? And so the UN did offer, a retirement package. She's 50 years old. I'm 54 now. And she took it. And so, young, very young.
To retire, that's great.
To retire, and when we moved to our homes, the first requirement in a home was a studio. Could be just a bedroom, just an extra bedroom, but she sprawled out and she painted. She outgrew the in-home studio. That's when we went and looked for an outside studio, and that's where she spent time in Dobbs Ferry. So.
Is that where this photo's from?
This one is,
Looks like yours.
this might have been Hamilton, but it was a similar style. So in, let's just say circa 80, 85 we must have been, in the 80s we must have been.
I think it looks like it's from the 80s.
Yeah, maybe in Dobbs Ferry. And so Dobbs Ferry was a studio that she found, which was a big warehouse right on the Hudson River. Very beautiful. But it was dilapidated and it was cheap. And she rented there. That eventually turned into a real kind of artist little enclave.
Let's see, do you mind, there's a few more photos of her in the studio. I'm not sure that's
The
the
one on
same
the right is
space.
actually in Princeton.
So later she moved down to, from Duxbury down to Princeton near you.
That's right. So my father passed in 2007. And by 2009, 2010, which I'm correct if I'm wrong, she came down to Princeton. That's where he lived today. And I think, so this was an interesting studio. It was in Forestville Village. It was kind of an outdoor mall that was struggling, and they were they were interested in just renting it out to anybody. And so my mom talked with I guess one of the real estate people, and she says, "Really, anybody?" He goes, "Yeah, anybody." So she took him up on his offer to take some space in Princeton, right? So she was there for some years.
So we see, I'm gonna turn a bit to the art now. We see all this abstraction. She obviously was open to and found her voice with abstract art. What a lot of people don't know is that Chinyee was a very, very accomplished, very skilled figurative painter. You should show the next slide. This is a painting from 1950 of this old man, old soldier with old suit. Amazing. And if you keep going, these are some sketches. These are in Africa. the next one as well.
From Senegal.
Senegal? Yeah. This is a Congolese girl. So this, I think, I'll pose this question to Jeffrey. How does a painter like this come to abstraction? And from what you know of Chinyee,
Right.
you can speak about how you met her as well, if you'd like. I don't want to get too abstract, that was two big questions, but
Yeah, well, I mean, I met her through the exhibition I was working on in 1997. I think you briefly showed
Yes.
that catalog.
yeah.
Which was an exhibition of Asian American artists who did abstraction during the abstract expressionist era, which specifically for this show was 1945 to 1970. And I don't know how much I'll get into the details now, you might want it later, but the point of this show was that, as I felt just by looking at the Asian American art of that period, that it became pretty clear to me that a lot of what was considered to be advanced and new and remarkably groundbreaking in abstract expressionism, actually the techniques were done centuries, if not millennia ago, in traditional East Asian art. People were amazed at the time to see like Jackson Pollock, flinging paint and so forth, and big color field paintings like by Rothko and other people, and the freedom, which was one of the big things of abstract expressionism, that you sort of did what you want. You just had no reservations, there were no limits at all. But it became very clear to me, looking at the earlier art and looking at Asian American art, that this generation of Asian American artists were really, in my opinion, a remarkable bridge generation and a synthesis generation of traditional East Asian art and modern Western abstract expressionism. And this show meant to try to show that it was not appreciated during the period of abstract expressionism. Of course, I said, as I was researching the show, to get back to the second part of the question, that's when, of course, I met Chinyee, because I was researching every single Asian American artist who did abstraction that I could. And a very large number of them dealt with this concept. Because during the period of abstract expressionism, and as I talked to Chinyee also, she sort of agreed with this as much as I did. The American critics, because abstract expressionism was what moved the center of the art world from Europe, especially Paris, the United States, especially Europe. The United States took it and they got it. And
It was American art.
and not only was it American art, it was considered the breakthrough. It was the most important thing in modern art, which is why the art world shifted. And so the American critics and writers of the time, for the most part, for a very large part, absolutely, totally denied the possibility of any influence from outside the United States whatsoever on abstract expressionism. They just, moved it from Europe, so Europeans, had no influence, although they certainly did. And certainly, the people from China, Japan, or Korea had nothing to do with it, but they did. But the people wrote otherwise, and just absolutely denied these clear influences. I'll go into what they actually were without making this particular answer too long. So that's what this show is about. That's why I met Chinyee, because she was doing that. She had already, very early on, the earliest work I have in this other show, the Hollis Taggart Show, which is in Chelsea, just finishing up today, was from 1955. So she was doing abstracted work quite early. And she was a key figure in the show. So that's how I met her, and after she moved to Princeton, since I worked at Rutgers, it was now easier for me to actually meet with her a great deal. And I was privileged to be able to talk to her, see her paint, discuss her painting, and so forth in her studio, for many, many years, and I've always admired her work, and that's why I continue to work not only in this general mode, but with Chinyee specifically.
Great. Just while you were talking about that abstraction, there's, this has some text there, but this is well attained, another artist we worked with, but there's a beautiful Chinyee piece that was in the show, the Yin and Yang. There's several, I'm not going to show all, but
Some around you right now.
that's right, yeah, you can see the real thing. So just to continue that question I was mentioning, she clearly is trained as a figurative artist, technically very accomplished. Not everybody can make that jump from figurative and landscape to abstraction. From your experience, or just in your opinion, how did she do it?
Well, with Chinyee, like with a number of artists, but almost more with her work comes from what actually, as I've found out over the years, and pretty much confirmed by the artists themselves and by history, is that there's a big difference between the Western philosophy of art and the Eastern philosophy of art, in that Western art, for many, many years, right, Impressionism was interested in realism, in presenting things as precisely as you could, which is essentially the opposite of the major concept of East Asian art, which is art is not meant to represent anything precisely. Imitation is not the point. And philosophically, in fact, it's considered ridiculous. Because here you are, you're making this thing. It's not reality. Reality is what you might be painting from, but it's not reality. So immediately, philosophically, you're not dealing with realism. What you are dealing with, what's important, is feelings and emotions and sensibility, which you can hopefully transmit to the viewer. So this is utterly different. This is completely different. And that's the story I just told you a little while ago. One of the few American artists who of the abstract expressive era who committed and was very interested in East Asian art was Mark Toby. And he early on was trained in Chinese calligraphy by Chinese artists, including one student who came to him where he lived in Seattle. And the student asked him this wonderful, wonderful question. Why do Western artists make paintings which look like a hole in the wall? And if you think about it, that's absolutely true. What they used to make was a landscape or even a figure. You put it on the wall, and what you're doing, you're sort of looking through the wall at the landscape. But what's the point of that? You should be looking at the landscape. That's the real thing. The art is something else. It's supposed to be not imitation, it's supposed to be. So, given that, she had that cultural, philosophical, artistic background in which abstraction actually is quite natural. And I said, I'm not going to go into now in the next question, but yeah, there are many, many different techniques that you see in abstract expressionism, which are abstract, but were said to be innovations by the American artists, but were absolutely not. They were done, again, centuries or millennia ago by East Asian artists. There may come back to later.
And the artists themselves have written and are outspoken by saying, yes, of course we were looking at that. It's I think the critics who were writing it out of history, the artists themselves are like, yeah, of course they're looking at calligraphy. So now you mentioned that she started working in abstraction as early as in the 50s, right? And this was the heyday of abstract expressionism here in New York. I've heard the term, or read the term, and you've even described her as such, the term lyrical abstraction, a little bit different from abstract expressionism. I wanted to talk about that term.
Related to that, I wanted to, if you could speak a little bit about the two areas that often abstract expressionism is lumped into two broad areas, one which is color field painting. Rothko is very famous for these. And the more expressionist action painting, what you mentioned, Jackson Pollock. So how does Chinyee fit in with all this?
Okay. The nice thing about Chinyee's work, and many Asian American artists' work, is that she didn't worry about such problems. Because they weren't really problems, because she was painting from her feelings and from her emotions, whatever came to her at that moment. She worked on that particular style, on that particular idea. Now, in this room itself, you have several works which are obviously different in feeling or structure. Now, you mentioned lyrical abstraction. This is sort of like a very informal type of a term which simply try to separate out paintings which seem to have a lighter touch than what was often the heavy-duty, big stroke, wide stroke, action painting, attacking the canvas, big thing. People like Franz Klein, who had, things like big black and white structures on the painting and so forth and so on. And that was also considered, it seemed to be a rather macho type of art, mostly supposedly masculine, and so forth and so on. But lyrical, of course, has a lighter touch to it. It even relates, you might say, to music, in a sense. But it's also a little bit freer. The strokes aren't necessarily that big. It's not slashing down the middle of a canvas. Now, Chinyee might do that because you cannot eliminate anything from what you want to do. But a painting like this one right here, that one would certainly be considered lyrical abstraction. Why? Because the overall feeling of it is sort of light. I mean, it's overall, you have drips, which are, instead of big marks, you have little spatters, which are light and almost seem to float. Often you have, and of course these paintings are much more, not monochrome, but they're mostly blue in this room. You would, in lyrical abstraction, have lighter colors. You'd have pinks, you'd have light oranges, you'd have very pale yellows. You would also often have the feeling of nature, which is very 100% basic to East Asian art. Everything derives from nature. The Americans and the American critics were very interested in abstract expressions and being really abstract. Has nothing to do with nature, which of course is ridiculous, but has nothing to do with it. We're just inventing new things, either they're shapes and forms which we've never been seen before. But people in lyrical abstraction and other types of abstraction said, well, no, you could possibly suggest nature. No, you don't have to be smashing against the canvas and making an abstract expressionist painting. But what's great about Chinyee is she didn't limit herself anywhere. In fact, this painting can be seen as more of a quote-unquote typical abstract expressionist action painting because you have the big bar going straight across the top, these large black forms, and so forth. But usually there are things which will modify it and soften it in her work. But I said, she would move back and forth. So lyrical abstraction is really a very small point within the history of abstract expressionism. But people separated it out because it seemed to be, again, a lighter movement and a lighter touch.
She was really adept with her color, really, and really bold, really, in the other room you see this really black paint. How does the color come into it?
Well, again, you almost have to separate between Chinyee and sort of general practice. Because I said, what's good, great about Chinyee? She just did what she wanted to do. I mean, she say that if she felt good in the morning, she'd paint a certain type of happy painting. If she didn't feel bad, she'd paint a more somber painting. The color, though, was the whole rainbow, the whole spectrum. Many artists would limit themselves to certain colors or wouldn't use many colors. You find very little green in abstract expressionism, mostly because for two reasons. Green is actually very hard to use in an abstract painting. And number two, it reminds you of nature. And the Americans, again, didn't want to be reminded of nature. They wanted to be inventing everything themselves. But Chinyee would take it from everything. So she would go from bright colors to dark colors. That was absolutely fine with her. You can see that even more in the collage behind it, because those go from practically only black and white to extremely light colors, including pinks and oranges and the rest. It would come that way. One of the interesting things about color, in terms of abstract expressionism and Asian American artists, is in the color field. Color field was considered an even better, more important refinement of abstract expressionism, because it kept on getting simpler, reducing everything to its simplest possibilities. And artists such as Rothko and other color field painters. One of the most important things that was said, Clement Greenberg was an important critic at the time, said this is extremely important, extremely advanced, because it became stained painting, which when you literally made liquid paints so that they actually stained into the surface and became one with the canvas. And that integration of one thing was seen as extraordinarily advanced. Now, among many other techniques, these are one of the things which I consider, again, some of the most ridiculous historical statements, because if you were dealing with the idea of suffusing a surface with color and making it one, what better example do you have than the water-based paints of East Asian art, which always, they're water-based paints on silks and on paper, which is very important, which of course Westerners still don't like a lot, that they want canvas. Watercolors, they suffuse into the surface. So these were advanced way before there was ever such an idea as color field painting. Chinyee had that experience, had that history behind it. So that aspect of color field painting was natural because the examples were there.
So you talked a lot about her moods and how they affected her paintings. Andy, this is a question or something we can talk about. Growing up with her and, as your mom, how did you see that? How the moods, how her life affected her art?
I think we were talking about, she passed last year. And it's funny how these things emerge, when she passed. In my house, the green painting was in my house when I was growing up. And we have another one that's very dark. These are from the 60s. And I think people are like, that's really cool, it's really old. It's very much a somber tone. And this is my hypothesis, I pieced it together. And with my brother too, which was during the 60s, my brother's 12 years older than me. She raised my brother as a single mom. And, I was mentioning her career in the United Nations. I mean, she was struggling. And it was a very, very difficult period. And I never really understood why we never talked about my brother's father until last year. And the reason which came to light was that he left my mother before my brother was even born. And that kind of just blew my mind. And that's why. And so when we reflect back on the work that was coming out during that period, it does have that somber mood. And so I think when I look back, her art is very much a reflection. I think it's instinctive was a word that I was thinking about. I think when you asked when did she go from figurative to abstract, to me, she just never wanted to be limited by anything. And like in her mind, it was always, why not? Why can't I do this? Sure I can. And she was very, very instinctual. And I think that just comes out, her mood comes out. Color is an expression of her mood. And so my joke is when I came around, things got a little bit brighter. I'm very biased. I'm very biased, and I admittedly am very, very lucky. So by the time I came around, she had met my father, and things were much better. My father was working, and allowed her to retire early to paint. Like, retire early from, like, what I guess people would say the normal job, but for her, it's like, that's a liberating moment for her to be able to find time and to work. It wasn't work, it was joy.
But of course she was still painting while she was working.
She was, but you know, the volume was less, of course. And then actually these trips allowed her to paint.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you do these missions, you have a meeting, and you have downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so that allowed her to explore, we have these books. I actually just, I was telling you, I just framed a couple other pieces the last couple of weeks, which we had in some of the old sleeves, which we pulled out. And so that's where she found time. But anyway, back to kind of moods and color and abstraction. That is, you can kind of see it. She goes through eras. I would call them eras, like different, you know, she'll play around. These two that are from a similar era. The one behind us is a little bit more recent, which is, I mean, recent, I say 10 years ago. But yeah, so you'll see that whole series with the collage. She also liked cutting up her father. Her father was a great calligraphist.
Yes.
And we had all this calligraphy. My mom ripped it up, and I was like, what are you doing? and she integrated with her work. I mean, I don't know if they're in these, but there are other pieces that have that. And that just became a texture and also a part of what was important to her.
Yeah.
And I think
Sometimes you'll see I've only seen the images with some of the painting maybe this size that's abstract, but then there's a piece of calligraphy.
Yeah.
Collage. So that's your father's. Grandfather.
My grandfather, her father's, calligraphy. I think one way of kind of incorporating in his work.
So you mentioned when you came around, and we're going to show the photo, the painting. That on the left, that's Andy. That's with your nanny, right?
I was with my nanny, and then she just kind of, I guess, painted the face over a little bit.
And then on the right is one of your kids.
One on the right, it says me when I was a baby on the bottom right. That was, this is Lily. This is the little one.
So even though she's painting abstraction, of course, when the grandchildren come around, she's back to she's painting.
Yeah.
So show the next.
This is 2010. That's 2010. Yeah. The one on the left is Emma, who's our middle child, and the one on the right is Izzy, our oldest. Izzy's now 20 years old, and Emma's 17. So they must have been around 8 or 5 at this period, or maybe even younger, 7 and 4. Yeah, so we had a routine to visit her every Sunday in her studio.
Oh, really?
And then I don't think she actually got them to pose, but we took a photo. And she painted from the photo, and then Lily, when she saw her, wrote down me when I was a baby on her photo on that painting. But yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about, you brought these collages, and I'll come back to you, Jeffrey. Was this something she worked on often? These are all around the same time. They're early 2000s. I picked up this book because in Shanghai, Chinyee had a 50-year retrospective. This was in 2007. And we'll get to this in a second, but it's shortly after this that these collages were made. I'm curious how this fits into her overall process of her body of work.
Some of the things that Anne was just talking about, the work that included her father's calligraphy, which she did talk to me a bit about, because she said it also was sort of also honoring her father.
Yes.
To have her in the work itself, and she said he was very good calligrapher in her opinion, so we wanted to continue that. And I think you'll find, even very early in her work, you'll find a collage or two, because number one, I think it's also the use of paper, which is a traditionally a basic support for Chinese painting, paper or silk. So to use paper in this modern way as a collage is somewhat natural. Also, she used it in a very sensible, practical way. It's that, she was always doing work on paper, creating watercolors, and she was very self-critical. She looked at it and really wanted to make sure it was done right. Watercolor, of course, is especially within the Chinese tradition, is basically a non-correctable medium. You can, but really usually this doesn't work. It's, there's a thing in Chinese art which is called the one-go method. That's it, we put it on, it's done. So given that, with abstraction and the balancing of the colors and so forth, sometimes it didn't work, it didn't work. So what she did is she had a lot of those, she would tear them up, which made sense because as you look at the collages, really by tearing them up, she got, in a certain sense, different compositions. She was able to literally move the paint around, which you can't do in a watercolor. Also, which I think is very significant compositionally, you'll have to look at these in detail later on, is that when you rip the paper, especially if it's a nice, strong, heavy paper, your edges are not clean edges as if you cut it with a knife. They have little ragged edges to them of white. And those actually become their own little compositional motifs and really enliven the picture a lot. When you look at those collages and you see those little jagged edges and realize how important they are within the picture. So this was both a way of recycling earlier things which didn't work, and she was often I said she was very critical of work. She would just sometimes stop on a painting, a large painting, and say, this isn't working, and just set it to the side, and never go back to it again. It was just there. In fact, sometimes she, by Tolstoy said, you have so many of these. She said, well, get rid of them. She wasn't going to use them again. She wasn't going to paint over it. That's not the way she worked. So she actually let me give some of these to artists, like the Rutgers, who could use a nice canvas because they were students didn't have a lot of money. She said, sure, that's good. We're going to let people use it. I'm happy about that. So, she would just move on if she felt it wasn't good and not concern herself about the things that didn't work. She wished they did, but it didn't. And with collages especially, you just tear it up and see if you can do something else with it. And she certainly did.
It's funny you mentioned the one-go painting. I've been to many ink artist studios, and they throw out many more works than they keep. Just crumpled up. Once the ink, once it touches that paper, you have to react, and it soaks right in. That's it. So, I quite love these collages. So, was Chinyee always, this is a question for both of you, was she worked, was always solitary? Was she part of artist groups? Did she have colleagues, peers? I'm just curious how the artist community around her was.
I think Dobbs Ferry was a period where she had maybe kind of a support group. There was photographers in the building, other graphic designers, but when she worked, she was by herself.
she listened to Miles Davis, Kind of Blue was a CD that was on repeat often. And then there was also Chinese opera. So she would have the Chinese opera going while she painted as well. And that's, yeah, I think that was, the music was always a part of her surroundings. And then I think the art, in Dobbs Ferry, they also enjoy their happy hours, right? So that's where the martinis come in. And so they usually get, I think it was kind of energy, just kind of the energy of the building really helped. You know, they're all trying to make the building better. And so they were, I think she influenced and people were coming in and out. In New York City, she had a couple write-ups at the time, so that she had a steady stream of like visitors occasionally. That I think that kept her going.
The Dobbs Ferry period, which Andy would have more linkage to. Although I certainly saw her there, and that's when I first saw her. She had that community. When she moved to Princeton, she was, in terms of art, frankly, much more isolated. Really wasn't part of any groups. She wasn't, of any sort. And she often told me how, earlier on she had more Manhattan gallery shows. There were some Chinese galleries, the Michu Gallery, which was important earlier on. And then I think she was at the Meridian Gallery for a while. But it's not easy. Galleries don't keep you forever. And so for quite a while, she was just getting small shows here and there, and I spoke to her about it. But the thing about it, her art was very much self-generated. I mean, it came from her ideas and her emotions. She would just go to the studio and go at it. So her work moved along on its own pace and its own forms. From time to time, I would be able to have her in a show, which I did when I could. She would have a show at the place where she lived, because they had little exhibitions and other social events there, so she had a show in the place where she lived. But I said, it's difficult for any artist. It's all just sometimes, almost frankly, a matter of luck in terms of the art world. It sounds a terrible thing to say, but I believe it's true. You happen to meet somebody or you get an exhibition and things will happen for you, and if by chance you don't meet the right people, you might not get into the shows. It's happened with a lot of the artists that did with the Asian American show. A few became famous, most were, lifelong professional artists that saw shows here and there, but in my opinion, certainly still have not gotten enough credit for what they did during that period. But Chinyee kept on going. I mean, she was always happy to do her work. I should say, listening to her music and so forth, and getting her own inspiration, all self-generated, and that's, I think, a very admirable thing, is that I think that's why her art kept on its high level, because it was hers. It wasn't tied to a style, it wasn't part of the, what was au courant in the art world at the moment. It was her, and she just kept on doing it.
I think it's remarkable. She was in New York City. She was, but she continued to show big shows. A big part of it was Alice in Hong Kong. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about the retrospective. Did you have some help putting this together? I know the gallery was instrumental in putting this together. This is obviously long before I joined the gallery, but it's in 2007 and in Shanghai. How did this come about?
I'm going to look over there and make sure I get this right. Because I'm pretty sure that Alice and Fine Arts asked me to be the guest curator for the show, because I know Chinyee's art pretty well at that point. And I selected the show. It was a full retrospective of all the different types. When I was looking through the catalog recently, this might sound strange, but one of the things, I didn't go into this, one of the things that she did for some period of time is that she Well, she really considered Mark Rothko to be a true master. She truly, truly admired his work. And she did something which is within the Chinese tradition, but not at all in the American or Western tradition. She made many, many works based on Rothko's format, which is basically a few rectangles, 2 or 3 rectangles above each other. And this is something which to me is wonderful, amazing, and terrible for her at the same time. Because within the Chinese tradition, many artists gave homages to earlier artists by not exactly copying, but making close representations of what they did to honor them and to show I'm learning from this person. I consider this person a master. So she made many, many works like this. And to almost anybody, any Western critic or this is not good in their opinion. These works will, at this point, will always be seen as copies of Mark Rothko, although it's clear in many of them she added her own touches, her own lines, her own gestures, and things like that. And when I was looking at the, that's Chinyee on top of Rothko in a certain sense. It makes perfect sense what she was doing. But when I was looking to retrospective catalog, I said, wait a minute, did I really choose that many of the Rothko paintings? I don't believe it. There's too many. It's like 20 of them. I'm saying, I would never choose that many of them. I don't know, did I? I guess I did. but like I said, I would not, well, maybe for a show in Shanghai, sure, because they might understand what's going on. She admires Rothko so much that she will make scores of paintings, which anybody normally, except for the ones which have the real Chinyee marks, I'd say that's a Rothko. And then when you find it's not a Rothko, you'd say, well, who's this copyist? What this person thinks they're doing? And I said, I both admire it because it's astonishing that she did this. And it's terrible for her career in a certain way, because I can't imagine without a real explanation, a real thorough explanation of any New York or American gallery showing these works, and people coming in and saying anything other than, well, these are fake Rothkos. I mean, they're not. She admitted it. She knew what they were. She wasn't saying it wasn't Dora. But so, it's an interesting problem for history now in her work, what's going to happen with these pieces. But I said, I admire what she's doing and the beautiful paintings. It's a wonderful example of, again, the difference between East Asian art philosophy and Western art philosophy. Those two, in this particular case, she's a wonderful case study. They don't mix it all at this point, and who knows what's going to happen.
I have a couple comments. One is she was always terrible at career management. And the second is, she's very instinctual. She'll do what she wanted to do, and she'll go with the flow, and she'll experiment. And I think I actually really like the Rothko period because it, I think she enjoyed creating those. They're beautiful, and as you mentioned, she had her own little take to it.
Yeah, that is something that you're right. It's very East Asian tradition. You can understand it through that lens.
Well, you asked about color.
Yeah.
I mean, Rothko was a great colorist, and that's what she admired. And Chinyee was a very good colorist.
Yes.
So these are lush paintings suffused with color, which is what Chinyee liked to do. So she continued to make them.
Sounds like a challenge for us here. That's right. We're gonna have to put together this show.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to some questions, but the last thing I'll mention is, although you mentioned the
career management. I mean, just this year, last year into this year, Chinyee was part of an amazing exhibition, a museum exhibition that went from Whitechapel in London to Arles in France at the Van Gogh Foundation and to another museum in Berlin. And this was a Women in Abstraction exhibition. Got great reviews. She was part of this show with many artists, but showing right alongside some of the biggest names, Ellen Frankenthaler, Elaine de Kooning, and John Mitchell in that show. So she really has made her mark, and I think people are starting to realize this. Jeffrey realized back in the 90s, but it's really well, you must be so pleased about this as well. I'm proud of you, I think.
Super proud. It's hard for me to kind of step outside my role as the son. So to be able to have a moment to talk about my mom and her place in your perspective, her place and how she grew up in New York, or seeing and how the career has developed. You know, I'm making a joke about, she's not really doing that. But yeah, it's really wonderful. I think she always told me, she's like, I just want people to find a connection with her work, and to just to appreciate it. I think that's what meant the most to her. She always talked about the size. I asked her about the size. Like, why don't you make smaller ones that are easier to sell? Because it's very hard for people to find size to place a painting like that. It's like, no, that's the size that she wanted to explore and work in. And so I think, as I reflect back what's important to her, the art has to create a feeling. You have to create whatever connection you have with the art. And she always loved meeting people who found that connection. I think that was really important to her. And then just, I kind of pause now and think like, what can we take away from my mom's career? And I just think to be able to find kind of a real identity and just kind of what you do. Like, writer's got to write. This is who she was. Yeah. Painter's got to paint. And well before I was born, she was painting, and literally right up to the very, very end, she was painting in any way that she can. Last few years were difficult. She had a stroke, and a big milestone in her recovery from her stroke was she started painting with her left hand. And she painted with her left hand. The color was reduced just for simplicity, right? We couldn't mix colors. But she had her own little studio set up within her little one-bedroom apartment, and she would paint with her left hand.
In her 90s.
In her 90s. Post-stroke. Daphne said they were wonderful.
Yeah, I saw them. They're beautiful pieces.
And they're back in our storage, but we were just delighted that she was picking up the brush again, and she had a routine. She had the music going, and so I think what I can take away from that is that if you can find what you're doing, you should go for it. You should do it. Follow your instincts, and then it's not work. It really is just living life. She lived life. That's what we do. That's why we drink martinis, because that's big in terms of life.
So, does anybody have any questions? Should take advantage since Andy's here, Jeffrey's here.
Good question for Andy. So growing up with an artist and seeing her in the studio, and I love that you brought your daughters into the studios to visit her. For you and your brother, did you get influenced by that? Did she try to bring art into your life to try to get a paintbrush in your hands, or?
She did, in the sense that when I was a child, I was always trying to paint and draw. I didn't really have any aptitude. But I did kind of ask her about her work and her composition and her color choices, and what she was trying to do with the cutouts. So I learned from that. And my work today is creative. So I have a real conviction that creative makes a difference. So that's kind of how she's thinking.
Yes.
She had a different approach when she's painting oil canvas versus watercolor. Is it always the one shot method, or did she have a different?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that, because while you were speaking, all sorts of stuff was happening there.
I was asking if she has a different approach with watercolor versus oil on canvas or acrylic on canvas.
If there was a difference, because I think the overall emotional intent was going to be the same, is simply because the nature of the medium. When you're working with watercolor, all sorts of things can happen, especially if you want things to be spontaneous. You can work in a very, very, very free manner. So that helps. The oil or the acrylic obviously has more substance and body to it. So it will have a different feel, in a sense, on the canvas. It will move differently. But if you manage to paint things like this, you introduce the drip, you introduce the spatter, and in ones like this, where you introduce very fast brush stroke, it can be done. It can be done. It looks different because it's not absorbing it as much, but that gives it a whole different look, and it's sometimes more powerful in a different way than a watercolor, which can be very subtle. So medium means something to an artist, and certainly it meant things to her. And as Andy was talking about the last works that she was doing, I was mentioning to you about that I had seen some very long scroll type pieces that she did, and I thought those were terrific, and those are probably rolled up somewhere. Maybe we've got to show them.
We've actually shown a few of them in the last show in Hong Kong, and unfortunately, I don't think there's enough of them because they sold out very quickly. So I don't know if maybe Andy or Jeffrey, during her lifetime when she was working with, things on canvas and watercolor, if she did return to doing rice paper, because those scroll ones were done on rice paper. So again, the medium is very different, and the way it flows and the brush moves, it gives a different sensibility.
I don't know if I know the answer to that question. I just observed that she would work in, she would spend weeks in one medium, and then she would spend weeks in a different medium. So she would move from, like when she was doing oil or acrylic on canvas, she would be in it for several weeks. And then there'd be periods, I feel like sometimes it's time driven. She's got travel plans. It's almost like she needed to block out more time for that. And then so when she had less time, she would kind of scale it down to fit the time of it available. That's very insightful. That's what I observed.
And then maybe Jeffrey, can I also ask you what you think about her collages? Because we didn't really talk about that, and that actually is also quite a big part of her practice. I feel like she did do a whole series of collages, like the ones we're showing here.
Oh, no, she worked in sort of a series. Very often when I came over, she would say, well, look at these that I did. It was all collage. You know, and she just says, well, look at all these, what do you think about all these? And there were collages. And then another time I would come over and she'd just done, you know, 4 or 5 large paintings, and then look at these, all right? And, which makes sense, because I know, you know, I saw when I went to the studio, she was setting things up. You know, she put up a number of blank canvases, and she worked sometimes from one to the other. She didn't always finish one. She would, you know, again, she'd be looking at it, so she set it to the side.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite finished yet, something had to be done, but she was thinking about it, so maybe move to the next one. Move to the next one, start doing something, maybe she'll finish that one straight, maybe she won't. And so she had sort of options, which is sort of interesting, because it sort of keeps your mind active, looking between these different things that you're doing sort of at the same time. So yeah, she certainly seemed to make sense to do series in terms of medium, because it was practical for another thing. You're doing big paintings, do big paintings. You want to put out your collages, you really know some paintings, rip them up and start laying them out. You know, it's practical. And then it gives you ideas from one to the other.
It's almost as if she had to complete an idea during this period before she moved to a different medium. Yeah. Okay, us.
So, yeah.
Yeah, for Jeffrey, I really loved you sharing your insights on sort of the East and West and the conflicts, but also how they can work with you all together. I'm curious, if you were to look with your eye on art and so many genres of her work, what would you say to you kind of defines her? Or if you were to look at a work and identify it as hers, how would you, is that a fair question to ask? What would you say is sort of the essence of what you think makes her art?
Well, it's not a fair question. It's a question which probably can't be answered.
Yes.
Because, you know, she, as one can see, constantly changed. And in fact, I think there's 1 or 2 of her exhibitions that are called like change, because she never stayed still. You know, she was always changing. That was important to her. That was important to her. You had to be, you know, it was like growth. And I said, it's like nature. I mean, it's not the same. It comes back, it's different. It changes over the years. So, you know, there's no way of defining sort of watching it. You know, the abstract expressionist label is perfectly reasonable from an art historical point of view. I mean, yeah, these are abstract expressionist paintings. But mostly they're just Chinyee. You know, it's basically what she came up with, you know, all the time. Just changing within a style which gave her a very broad range, and that could be, of course, one reason she went into it, because there it was. She could do whatever she wanted. The abstraction was important because I felt after that freedom of emotion, and she often talks about emotion. The freedom of emotion that she got from that, you really couldn't get in something else. You could make some very nice realistic work, which you did, and you could show emotion on that in a person's face or something like that. But pure emotion, which gets back again, in my opinion, to the Chinese philosophies, where there's energy moving through the universe. You know, the Tao moves through everything. And Qi, for those of you who are familiar with that term, you know, the way that the Tao manifests itself through the artist with this indefinable force called Qi. So, this is a perfect style to do it, because it can all just come out. It can all come out. You can consider it, you can think about it, but you just have to do it. So, you know, she was a person working within that historical field, sure. But she has her own way of doing things, as one sees by looking at her work.
Beautiful answer.
Well, thank you, Andy, thank you, Jeffrey, thank you, Brett. And yes, we'll be around, and yes, there are martinis.
I think that's where Izzy went. She went to go.
Did she go? But yes, we'll be around, so any other questions, just feel
Actually, the one funny thing I wanted to say was, you know, the martini is a constant in any conversation about Chinyee, but one of the interesting things about this with me and Chinyee is that I don't drink. And whenever he would say, let's go to lunch, and we'd invite him to lunch, no, but you have a martini. And I would say, as you know, Jimmy, I don't drink. Well, that's okay. Come back.
That's
So,
what
so he said, so you gotta yin yang, these things work.